All right, Ecclesiastes 4, let's call this one Hope in Hearing. In this chapter that seems to point back to one of those dominant themes from the sauce in Proverbs, where listening had a lot to do with our wisdom. And here it is going to seem that listening has a lot to do with the hope that can be found in life, as Solomon seems to reflect during this point in his. This also seems to be a chapter that resembles Proverbs more than any I've seen to this point, and roughly gives us short bits of wisdom in combination with, as we saw in the Proverbs, some of those longer 2 or 3 verse treatments of observations of what might help us out on this journey through what can sometimes be a difficult existence. But once again, it seems that even in the midst of all of the reasons that Solomon has to be hopeless in this point in his life, he still finds a glimmer of hope, and contrasting the opportunities that still are in front of a wise youth as opposed to us when we stop listening. Beginning in verse 1, though, he's going to say, "Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun." Beautiful thing about Solomon's writing seems to be that beyond him as a leader, he is a man who cares for his people. And even though he may be able to give justice from the justice seat of the king, he still seems to be able to look out over a land in which he cannot perfect justice for everyone, no matter how much he tries to do it, even as king. And in life, I have seen the way in which, even in circumstances where we cannot physically help, simply helping others to acknowledge that we understand the genuine suffering that they are going through is a whole lot better than gaslighting, a term we commonly use for pretending like they really aren't suffering at all. As the preacher is going to continue in the next few verses to give us short bits of wisdom. Verse 4, helping us to see the way in which Solomon realizes that so much of our motivation for work is envying those around us. Verse 5, he's going to talk about, however, there is a contrast where the fool won't work at all, but simply devours himself instead of accumulating or working to accumulate that he would need to provide for the future. As verse 6 is going to go back to a familiar theme we saw in the Proverbs, where he says, better is a handful of quietness than 2 handfuls of toil and striving after the wind. Going back to that familiar theme of work and how there can be value in work, especially if God's blessing it. But work just for work's sake can become awfully futile after a while. As he'll go on in the next couple of verses, verses 7 and 8, to say that there is a special pain that he has seen in the burden of isolation. However, in verses 9 through 12, he's going to make the famous observation that 2 are better than 1, and a 3-fold cord is not easily broken, helping us to understand that even though there are times in life when we must be isolated, there are times when we need to understand that our situation can be improved by finding healthy partnership or healthy companionship in the midst of our struggles. As he is going to go on to conclude in verses 13 through the end of the chapter, that being about verse 16, to observe, better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. Thus our title, Listening or Hearing, pointing us back to the Proverbs, where Solomon, for the most part, the author of most of those Proverbs, realized that part of the sauce in wisdom and finding value in your labor comes in being able to listen to wise counsel. And he is going to understand that a young man, even though he may be inexperienced, is better off than a seasoned vet who can no longer take wise counsel. But he's going to say, even still, he has not found his answer to the meaning of life, because even the young wise man, even in time, he will be forgotten as well. In a chapter whose final verse can't really be spun into a happy ending, but it's chapter 4. Stay tuned, because Solomon is only a portion of the way on his journey to rediscovering his reasons to hope.